Well, hello there. My name is HW, and thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. You've already seen the title, and some of you have probably already started giving this a thumbs down. Or maybe you've already jumped into the comments section before you've heard anything I have to say.
Dear HW, I can't believe you. The fragile harmonics that exist in a crystal lattice cannot survive in a solid state environment. They are crushed, disliked, unsound.
Well, I don't know what to tell you, other than it's about time we had a hard talk. Now, some of you are going to be triggered by this, but I'm going to lay it out as clearly as possible. If you watch the channel, you know that I love guitar amplifiers. I love tube amps especially. They are incredible. They are amazing. I have a small and growing collection of vintage guitar amplifiers that I absolutely love, but they've got some serious problems. And that's why I have no qualms about saying the Kemper really is better than a tube amp. Okay, I'm going to break this down into 3 reasons. The Kemper is better than a tube amp for these 3 reasons: flexibility, portability, and tone. That's right, tone. I'm saying the Kemper sounds better than a tube amp. Let's get into that in a little bit. First of all, flexibility. Now, to understand why tube amps are built the way they are, you've got to go back to the 1950s because we have a couple clues in the early designs. You see, in the early 50s, popular music was going through some changes, and they had a problem. How are we going to get the bass, guitar, and vocals of this new 4 or 5-piece band lineup that was becoming so popular? How are we going to get those sounds over the drums? That's right, over the drums. You see, drums aren't quiet, so we have to get everything else up to the drums level to be heard. And that's why on early Fender designs, you don't see a normal and a bright channel. You see an instrument and a mic channel. Many of the earliest tube amps designs that we still pull from today were actually designed to be just as much a PA solution as a guitar tone origination solution. It wasn't just there to color your guitar tone. It was also there to put your guitar and your vocals above the drums to be heard. Now, fast forward to 2020. Most of us are using at least some sort of a PA system. Even portable PAs have been very cheap for the past 20 or 30 years. Honestly, how many gigs are you showing up to that has no PA at all? You have to put your guitar and your vocals through your guitar amplifier. For me, I've just never experienced it, and I'm 33 years old. I've played in all types of situations: churches, bars, club, fly dates, festivals. I've played a lot of places. I've never once had to run my microphone, my vocals, through a guitar amplifier. But that was the challenge in the 1950s, and that actually informs a big part of why tube amplifiers are built the way they are. 410s were common, 210s were common, 112s were common. The wattages, they needed power to get above a drum set. Now, this is neither good nor bad, but all this is to point out that tube amps have one purpose: to get sound loudly out of the box they are contained inside of. They are meant to create decibels, and lots of them. And this is why digital solutions like the Kemper are so much more flexible than a tube amp today. When I'm at home, I can place my tube amp on top of the new Kemper cab, and if I want authentic amp-in-the-room feel and sound, I can use one of Kemper's new speaker imprints. If I want to hear exactly the sound that I would hear through microphones or a mic'd up amp in the next room, I can use the cab built into the profile. If I want to take my Kemper out to a gig to go play with some friends at a bar or a church or a club, I can send the finished signal with delays, with reverbs, with my cab, microphones, and preamps directly to the front of house. And I'm free to have still all sorts of options to listen to the Kemper on stage myself. I can listen through in-ear monitor. I can put a monitoring solution on stage, like an FR cab, and listen that way. I could put a real guitar cabinet on stage so that I feel like I'm listening to an amp, but they're hearing the result of speakers, microphones, preamps, and all that jazz. I can even send stereo out to the board for the full mix, while I throw my guitar on one side so that I can have other instruments on the other, so I can hear the band more clearly in a live situation. Or maybe I need to track some guitars remotely for a recording project. Or maybe I need to go to a studio and track some guitars there. I have all sorts of options in what I'm going to send the mix engineer. I can simultaneously send him a finished, ready-to-go, mix-ready sound that I know works live or from other recording projects, projects because I've been able to save exactly the tone I've used prior. Or I can do something like send him my raw guitar performance so that he can reamp it after I'm done with the performance itself. And on top of all that, doing very common setups like true stereo, getting a true stereo sound to the audience would require normally 2 tube amplifiers. Doing a wet, dry, wet setup would require 3. But I can do all that with 1 Kemper. And since the studio isn't the only place you may be traveling with the Kemper, reason number 2 that the Kemper is better than a tube amp is portability. Portability is something we often don't talk about. There's this attitude that exists out there. Man up, carry a heavy amp. Isn't it worth it for the tone? Come on, people have been doing it forever before you. Well, I'll tell you what my experience has been. I'm not a professional guitar player that makes his living on the road, and I certainly have never played for any big-name bands that would get me cartage or a bunch of full-time roadies to set up my gear. But I have done a number of fly dates, I have done some one-off things for artists, and it's always been my experience that travel is required. I'll give you an example. About 1.5 years ago, I did a gig for a friend. We were going to go play at the Hard Rock in Orlando, Florida. Now, the gig didn't pay a ton of money, but all our travel was taken care of. We were going to stay in a pretty nice hotel, and after we were done with the gig, we got free admission to Universal Studios Orlando with a bunch of friends, and it was going to be a fun time. Showing up to the airport with a tube amp was not an option. We weren't going to be able to ship anything down there, and I knew that there wasn't a ton of budget for this gig. You might be thinking, HW, we know, that's what backlines are for. But I've used backlines enough to know I'd rather not trust them if I don't have to. The truth is, I was able to take my Kemper, sounds that I had used on the record we had recorded a couple months before. I was able to take it with me in my carry-on luggage, and I was able to make that a viable and money-making gig. Had I had to get an amplifier there, had I had to check more luggage, it really would have been close. And that's the reality of the music business today. Even touring acts who make their living full-time touring on the road are having to be very careful. They're having to be very selective about how they plan out dates across America. And they have to hit the road and hit the road hard. Gone are the days when acts get 3 and 4 days off to waste a bunch of money and stay in fancy hotels in between gigs. It's just not that lucrative on the road anymore. Nobody's playing giant stadiums. Well, a couple people are, but most of us aren't. The portability of the Kemper gives it the ability to go seamlessly between stages, studios, and on the road. And that is important for musicians that are actually trying to make money. I'm not talking about the weekend warriors here. I'm not talking about guys who have a $4,000 matchless and $3,000 in pedals and $5,000, boutique guitars, and they play 3 songs on a Sunday morning, or even they play 2 sets on a Friday night. Nobody on a Friday night really does that though, right? Come on, you know who I'm talking about. Even the Sunday morning guys with their enormous rigs. They're not trying to make a living. They're enjoying themselves. They have luxury gigs. They usually have a 9 to 5 during the week that affords them a fairly expensive gear habit. And so, yeah, it's fun. I used to do that. I'm one of those guys. Maybe one day I'll bring in my $7,000 1957 Bandmaster just so I can play it live one week. But guess what? It's still not going to sound as good as my Kemper. And that brings me to reason number 3 and why I think the Kemper actually sounds better than a guitar amplifier. Now let's back up and qualify what I mean by that. You might be thinking, HW, I tried a digital solution before and it didn't sound as good. The best tone I ever had was when I cranked up a Fender or a Vox or a Two-Rock or maybe a Dumble. It was glorious. My friends, I don't doubt that, but if we circle all the way back around to that first example I gave you of an amp in the 1950s. Amplifiers were designed for one purpose early on, to get your sound above the drums and to the listener's ears. And this is why I think the Kemper can easily, very easily, sound better than a tube amp. You see, prior to playing a Kemper, this was my experience. I would bring in my $2,000 or $3,000 amplifier, a couple $1,000 in pedals, and really expensive guitars. Yes, I was that guy. I would show up, I'd plop it down in an amp room or backstage or behind me, and I would always get handed the same thing. An $89 microphone to capture all of that glorious work I had done to build my beautiful rig. Because isn't that what we all experience? Don't we all get a sound man who has other problems going on? We get about 20, 30, 40 seconds to mic up the amp. We listen through in-ears or through a monitor and we go, oh, it sounds great. Don't you want to take control of your tone? Why do we spend all those weeks, all those hours, all that time on YouTube researching delays and reverbs and the best algorithm and the rare JRC chip that went into this pedal or the clon or this, if it's all going to get reduced down to an SM57 that was placed in front of your rig with almost no care at all? You see, one of the beautiful things about the Kemper, or digital in that matter, is that I get to take full control over my sound. I know exactly the tone that is going to get sent front of house. I have the power to mic up with my Royer 121, my SM57, my SM545, my Neve preamps, my APIs, and fine-tune the mic placement until my sound is perfect. Then I get fine-tuning adjustment. I have pre and post profile and amp EQ. I can dial in my tone to be mix ready, live ready, in the room ready. I can have any amount of readiness that I am willing to put in. And that is why I have this question for you. What is really going to get you a better sound? Taking all that time with a Kemper and being able to save it and produce consistent results week after week, gig after gig, recording session after recording session, or just bringing your tube amp and leaving the mics, the EQ, and the preamps outside of your control? I think that's a personal question, to be honest. If you're comfortable with having half of your sound, because that really is about half the signal chain there. I know that from profiling and recording a lot of guitar amplifiers. Mics, preamps, and post-amp EQ are so hugely important to the finished product that if you're not taking control of it, you're just really leaving it up to chance. Look, I'm not a tube amp hater. I'm a tube amp lover. But I'm also a Kemper lover, and I'm a lover of solutions. Solutions that make my life easier, and solutions that make for better music. I really cannot imagine recording guitar for people any longer, or playing live without my Kemper. I just don't have any desire to bring tube amps out of my house. I enjoy them. I run pedals through them. I love rare and hard to find gear. I love vintage guitars. I love vintage amplifiers. They sound beautiful. I'm romantic about them. I close my eyes and I listen to those vintage amps and I just get this sensation that comes over me. This is the sound of the past. This is history. This is unmistakably addicting. I love tubes. I love the smell of that hot burning glass. I love that speakery that comes out when you just crank a tube amp. I love how loud it is and it echoes in the room, and I love when it feeds back, and I love slapping a power chord and being able to hear the harmonics. You could almost whistle them as they go up. I love feeling like Jimmy Page or Albert Lee and just pew, 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 pew. It's beautiful. But my friends, when there's a deliverable in front of me, when it's my job to go play the parts of a song or to deliver 5 tracks that's going to be all the guitars on a tune, it's really important to me to be able to adjust that EQ and pull up other amplifier sounds quickly so I can get those tracks done and get it back to a producer so I don't have to spend days and days working on what could otherwise take me, a long afternoon. Well, that's my opinion. And I guess it's worth what you paid for it. I've been HW. Thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. HW, out.